But I'm going to show you what has been hidden from you for two reasons. Industry partnerships with government research that create commercial products with patent protection, and that the government has no idea what to do about a bigger problem. You are about to have your eyes open, and because what I'm about to show you, well, I don't care. You need to know. This game is about to end. We know now that several sun-sized stars have a specific period or cyclical nova event that is not exactly like a supernova, but casts off trillions of tons of mass in huge events. Even solar storms that are 10 times larger than the Carrington event would cause massive catastrophes on any planet not protected by a geomagnetic field. So let's go back 3.5 billion years ago. Your new collective has found a habitable planet along a star lane that shows a warm planet with a breathable atmosphere and possibly some new assimilations. Vibrant and alive with life, but it's an anomaly. It has a huge atmosphere without a geofield. Not knowing that you are arriving after the field collapse and that this little world is no longer protected, your collective thinks, how can that be? Then the alarm clock goes off 120 million miles away on the star of the system, and a huge recurring micronova event occurs that blasts trillions of tons of mass out into the planets of the system. The first flash of X-ray, gamma ray, and ultraviolet when it happens cause the oceans to boil, and you watch the atmosphere expand and begin to be blown off into space by the solar wind. Then 24 hours later, when the first debris shock wave arrives, the atmosphere is peeled off and stripped away as the planet rotates into the maelstrom of micrometeors and debris that rips the atmosphere off and blows it off into space. The atmospheric pressure drops to nearly zero. The water in the oceans, rivers, and lakes flash freeze into ice. Any clouds drop out of the sky and fall to the surface or blow off into space. In the days thereafter, the nova debris creates dust that buries the frozen oceans and lakes in layer after layer of dust as the nova debris field passes and moves out to the outer solar system. And when the Mars Global Surveyor reached Mars, what we found is a freeze-dried planet with no geofield, nearly no atmosphere, with subsurface magnetic bubbles covered in dust. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mars. A freeze-dried planet being sandblasted for eternity. An atmosphere you cannot breathe. The perfect prison planet. You cannot live on the surface, and the constant sound of the wind blowing will last and last. It will last as long as this lasts, the thing that caused it. The sun will not stop exhausting mass into the solar system, and we should be very, very grateful every day that life is only here because we have something deep inside the Earth that deflects the wind of our star and keeps surface life safe. Mars is the perfect example of planets that lose their magnetic field. The 3,000-mile scar of the early D-ring magnetic collapse at Val Marineris, huge shield volcanoes from the heavy bombardment that helped form the atmosphere, frozen oceans and meteor impacts are the artifacts of a dead planet. And all the while, the clock ticks on. The solar cycle, the Glassberg cycle, and the newly learned about cycle, the vote reset clock cycle, every 12,068 years. And now the good stuff. Why isn't what I'm about to show you widely known? Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts found that there is $21 trillion missing from the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, military, and housing. It's not missing. It's been spent. Where was it spent? The global space budget was $344 billion in 2016. The U.S. spent $90 billion, but really it's much larger if you add in the covert and clandestine projects out of congressional oversight. We spend 2 or 3 times that amount, and that's just outer space. That's a lot of money by any measure, but why spend it? In 1947, something scared the crap out of the military high command when they analyzed the Nazi technology they took from Germany in 1945 and 46. And how the Germans got so far ahead of us. The German scientists said they captured technology from alien spacecraft and had back-engineered it. We then found the 16mm movies of these exotic propulsion system tests that showed a vehicle levitating and slowly ascending with no means of propulsion.
Now, discussions with the German scientists, we had discussions. General Trudeau told me one day, it took us 5 years to fully develop a transistor that somebody else started, and the integrated circuit. If we didn't have the help, like Obert says, that we've been helped, and Smith said, the boys upstairs, it would have taken us 250 years.
Then one evening on a remote ranch in New Mexico, on the night of June 14, 1947, the military high command realized the Nazi scientists were not lying.
Some of the materials that we picked up weighed anything. It looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hands. I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a foil in the pack of cigarettes. It was that thin. One of my boys told me, he said, there's something unusual here. He said, I tried to make a dent in this metal. He said, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He said, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it.
It didn't look like a plane crash. It didn't look like aluminum or you burn aluminum, because I've seen a lot of that in stainless steel. But what it looked like, of course, it didn't have any in those days. What it looked like more, it was a real light gray, almost to white. And some of it was a real dark gray, but it looked more like what fiberglass might look like today. And it wasn't dent or anything. And there wasn't any dents. But what it was, it's in pieces, looked like it'd been twisted and shredded and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't see any real sharp dents. Of course, I didn't stand there and look at it either, It's just what I noticed on the way going out.
It was aluminum in appearance. There were fragments of aircraft skin or whatever the thing was, and also some girders with pictures of hieroglyphic-like things on it. Anyhow, it was interesting. I did get to handle the material, and the material had some peculiar properties. But you squeeze it up in your hand as hard as you could, let go, and it returned originally to the original shape instantly.
And pieces of string or something like monofilament fishing line. And then the foil, like tin foil or lead foil, but you couldn't grease it and make it stay. I only had one little jagged piece of it. And you bend it over, make a crease, and it'd straighten right back out. And it wouldn't, I don't know, it had to hit with a terrific force because you couldn't cut that wood, the string, or the foil, and it wouldn't burn. And of course, that was kind of before the days of plastic, so it could have been some type of plastic, I don't know.
What was it that was actually loaded on board that you saw?
Well, we had just packages in wrapping paper, and one of them was triangle shaped, about 2.5 feet across the bottom, and the rest were in smaller packages, about shoebox size.
The triangle shape, is that an unusual kind of packaging?
It seemed to be. Yes.
And this was brown paper on the outside?
Right, with tape.
And did you actually load this stuff?
Yes, right.
What was your feeling when you...
Well, just like picked up an empty package.
By the end of July, the National Security Act was implemented. 2 months later, in September, the CIA was founded, and more of these craft were found.
And I was attached to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet as a member of his intelligence briefing team at his headquarters in Makalapa, Hawaii. The documents in Grudge 13 were the history of downed craft, alien craft that had crashed because the powerful radar that we were experimenting with after World War II somehow interfered with their guidance systems and caused them to crash. Quite a few alien craft crashed, and we were able to recover wreckage and, in some cases, whole craft that appeared not to be damaged.
The Pentagon and the CIA were faced with a dilemma. They did not control the nation's skies. Was there an imminent threat of an alien invasion? Do we have time to back-engineer their technology? More money than ever before was mobilized to address this threat.
And during a dinner party with a very, very close friend, the dinner party was somewhere in the mid-1950s. I assume it was between 1955 and 1957. A RAND employee was invited during that party, after several drinks, that the government was spending more money on anti-gravity than any other project in the history of this country. And therefore, he believed at that time that we had actually operational anti-gravity systems.
Parity was the plan. It took billions of dollars to figure out how these craft were powered. And here's the first secret kept from you. We figured it out. I can only tell you so much, but enough not to violate the National Security Act. I can't show you the classified details of the manufacturing processes. That would get me suicided. But unclassified materials, well, that's fair game. We first found that the propulsion system operated with an unusual and unidentifiable material that reacted to light, causing a lifting effect and a gravity field. A U.S. scientist identified the material containing an element of very high nuclei mass. A team of U.S. and Russian scientists then created element 117 in the lab, but element 117 has a half-life of about 30,000th of a second in its pure form. But it's all in the details. It's not element 117 that power these craft. It's element 118. Like mercury is a liquid and gold is a solid next to each other on the periodic table, 118 is stable. It was created, then promoted that it could not be created in the literature for this reason. It cost $1 trillion to figure this out. The study of superconductivity was created based on the propulsion system of these recovered craft. Pure element 118, alloyed in an oxide, is stable and can be excited into a superconducting state. This material reacts to light. Blasting pulses of high-energy photons, X-rays, into the superconductor create certain high-frequency hot vibrations, phonons, within the superconductor that absorb energy and increase in intensity. Upon lattice excitation, interbilayer superconducting coherence is transiently enhanced at the expense of intrabilayer coupling, creating a region that can tap the electric vacuum energy 0 point. The excitation creates the transient state zone, and photons entering the transient state zone break into electrons and positrons that further break down into the component kinetic energy particles of their construction and accelerate into and out of the electric vacuum orders of magnitude beyond the speed of light. The excitation of a superconductor creates a self-generating toroidal over-unity field that can attenuate magnetic and gravitic fields. This power generator system can accelerate and decelerate a craft along magnetic and electric lines of flux like the electrons in a geomagnetic field. It's similar to the spinning levitating magnets we've all seen, just bigger, like 30 meters in diameter. This image was given to me during my tenure at Space Station in 1992. It was taken by the district prosecutor of Puebla, Mexico on his way to American University and developed at the police crime lab in Puebla. I can verify the authenticity. This is the third generation after Roswell. Here is recently declassified footage of the same craft in flight. You can see the field around the craft.
Dude, there's a going, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like look at that thing. It's rotating.
Let's slow it down now for a better look. This footage was taken aboard a U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornet. The unaltered footage was captured by a Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared ATFLR pod sensor in infrared mode. The airspeed is 238 knots with a 120 knot headwind. Hot targets are black in the BLK mode and cold targets are white. The field around the craft is expanded and produces a white glow around the dark, hot, and concentrated field flow into the superconductor. Basic thermodynamics in plain view seen in this Raytheon imaging system. This means the propulsion is unaffected by atmospheric conditions. The fourth generation was captured in photographs in Scotland and at high altitude. The Delta configuration was to improve flight in the atmosphere with a central generator and 3 stabilizers. Now the 7th generation, the TR-3B, is under construction at Palmdale, transported to Groom Lake and Papoose Lake hangars at Area 51 at Nellis on 22nd Airborne flights out of Travis Air Force Base. This control deck, manned by 4 crew, is the most advanced flying machine ever created, utilizing technology from off-planet that can leave the atmosphere, achieve orbit, submerge to 1,000 feet of ocean, and travel along the magnetic field connections in the solar system. And the second law of motion dictates once on the magnetic field line, acceleration never stops. It can reach unheard of velocity in space with an intrinsic electromagnetic field that protects the crew from all forms of space radiation. I will get a call about this, or a visit. But there's more. In 1957, another threat became apparent, the sun. In 1957, the sun produced 2,500 solar flares that affected military communication systems. The Pentagon had to know how much a threat it was, so it created NASA in 1958, a year later, ostensibly in a space race, but in fact with a mandate to explore the planets to find evidence of solar effects. The moon was the perfect place to look first. The sun has been shining on the moon for 4.5 billion years. The Apollo program cost $30 billion in public funds and twice that in clandestine mission operations. Then in 1976, a private solar scientist, Douglas Vogt, discovered evidence that the sun had a cyclical micronova event, much like other stars, that better explained the end of ice ages and mass extinction events, a recurring micronova every 12,068 years. His book was sent to various universities and scientists when it was released, and he received this reply from one of the recipients of his book. In a letter from Kenneth Cussman, Mr. Vogt was told, "I have a cousin who is an astrophysicist and professor at University of Alaska. In 1973, he told me of an impending disaster that takes place every 12,000 to 15,000 years. He said that many scientists are aware of this, and that the covert reason for the space program was to explore this disaster throughout the solar system, moon landings, planetary probes, etc. He also said we do not have the technology or the foreseeable technology to avoid this inevitable situation. All we can hope to do is gather information." Interesting. But only the sun would leave evidence throughout the solar system. Although the moon produced evidence that was collected and analyzed, the Earth was more problematic. But Mr. Vogt found the evidence in the geologic record. The KT boundary iridium content is found in glass beads within the KT boundary, exactly like the ones found on the moon, with the same fission tracks and isotopes that can only be found in the sun. If a solar micronova might have killed the dinosaurs, might it kill us as well? After contact by agents of the CIA, it became clear to Mr. Vogt that the government already was aware of this. Then came the missions to Mars, billions of dollars and scores of spacecraft from Russia and America that provided the same evidence. In huge glass bead sand dunes found all over the planet, collected and concentrated in craters and plains by the never-ending wind. There is no tectonic plate motion on Mars, only wind and sun. The missions to get a habitat on the moon and Mars may be a desperate attempt to have some nucleus of the human race survive what is coming. It was finally realized in the 1980s that there was a coming inevitable solar event, an event that could not be shielded against except deep inside mountains and underground. So they decided to spend money on inner space and started to dig. The Air Force invented a boring machine that has been reinvented to drill all over the world various types of tunnels. They cut through rock with diamond bits. They're fast. Casing machines are sent into the bored-out tunnels to line the walls with waterproof casing and utility lines, and they have been constructed and supplied since the 1980s in earnest, mostly here and in Russia.
You got an underground roadway system here that runs all the way to Maine, to Washington, D.C., to Colorado. It's fully stocked. It runs completely underground. And you can see they've been hauling tons of military equipment. They're stocking all these bases. Now, the other thing is railroads.
They are powered by fusion reactors, and here's your second reveal. We have fusion power. We have fusion power for these subterranean bases because it's clean and no radioactive waste. A little background on how this was achieved. Pons and Fleischmann proposed in the 80s that lithium deuteroxide could be used as an electrolyte in a cold fusion experiment where a palladium electrode is saturated with deuterium under a current, attracting the deuterium to the palladium. in order to utilize the Coulomb pressure between the palladium atoms in the crystal to fuse the deuterium into helium, producing heat. Good idea, but they failed because they didn't realize the deuterium in the electrolyte rotated around one of its nucleons and it wobbled and could not nest in the interstitial spaces between the atoms in the palladium crystal, thereby preventing fusion by its Coulomb pressure force. It just wouldn't sit still, and a lithium grease developed around the electrode. At CalTech in 2004, I was developing a new subatomic particle theory, and based on my findings, I proposed that instead of deuterium, they should have used the more stable gas form deuteron that has a much smaller rotation radius. Both make helium, but one requires far less energy to fuse. It doesn't wobble around so much. Back in 2010, I believe the Japanese achieved success, and it was immediately suppressed. It worked. We surface dwellers will still have to suffer under the nuclear, oil, and solar power cabal. And that will definitely give me a visit late at night or very early in the morning, guns drawn. The tunnels and bases are even under the ocean, but all require an access system to get to the tunnels and down to the bases. Need evidence of this activity?
Because during the 90s, I could never figure out, why are the elevator company stocks and the mining company stocks going up? This doesn't make any sense. And then I started reading the Solaire report and I realized, oh, they're not mining for metal, they're building the underground bases and they need lots of elevators.
All of this is known at the highest levels of government, industry, and is far above top secret. The reason we are kept in the dark is simple. They really don't know what to do. They have no plans other than to save their own asses in these deep military bases. Why is Bezos really digging a cave in the desert at his launch site? People know. Now you do too. But humans have remembered these events where they survive, in caves and caverns, and left stone-etched rock drawings of the sun blasting out, planets being hit, things flying into the sky, beings with unfamiliar appearances and unfamiliar clothing, and messages left in stone so that future people are reminded by evidence that we have had help by others, not from here. So what to do? Are there only 10,123 days left before the next micronova? There is a lot of advice I could give you, but this is the best I can come up with.
Perhaps I'm old and tired, but I think that the chances of finding out what's actually going on are so absurdly remote that the only thing to do is to say, hang the sense of it and keep yourself busy. I'd much rather be happy than right any day. And are you? No. Well, that's where it all falls down, of course.
First of all, don't panic. Whatever time left or not, one thing is certain. Spend it wisely and don't wait to pursue your dreams.